signing up.
So it looks like we are streaming live on Facebook as well. So thanks again for everybody who is on Zoom with us this evening, as well as joining us via the Facebook page. So thanks for being here. We've got a really tight agenda because, as Owen kind of introduced, we've got a great set of panelists and elected officials that are joining us tonight to talk about campaign finance and transparency at the local level. So thank you all for being here. My name is Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of Colorado Common Cause. And tonight, you just heard that we have a wide variety of folks. I'll let people kind of do some of their own introductions just in the interest of time. But I did want to cover a couple housekeeping items before we get going officially. So we would love to hear from you tonight. We hope that you have lots of questions about the policy, about campaign finance, about what we can be doing at the municipal level to reduce the influence of money in politics and make sure that everyday people and everyone's voices are heard in our government. So please use the chat box to share your questions. If you're new to Zoom, how you'd be new to Zoom after a couple months of quarantine would be oppressive, but that is at the bottom middle of your screen. You've got a little chat icon. You can click there and enter your questions, and we'll be collecting those for when we get to the Q&A portion of the evening. We also have a hashtag that we're using tonight, and that's Reform Aurora. So the hashtag is Reform Aurora. And we hope that you will chat about this, that you'll mention it to your friends, and that you'll post on social media. If you decide to do that, go ahead and use that hashtag of Reform Aurora. And then I just wanted to thank all of the different groups that have put so much hard work into this effort. I know that you all are spending your evening with us tonight because you care about these issues and you care about having our democracy be everything that it can be. And PDA Colorado, CleanSlateNow Action, Working Families Party, Our Revolution, Metro Denver, DSA Colorado, Colorado Common Cause, Indivisible CD6, and Campaign Legal Center have put months and months of work into this along with our elected officials. So thank you to all of the groups and all of the folks that have put their heart and soul into this effort. So without further ado, we have Congressman Sarbanes. I think that Owen Perkins is going to do a little introduction, and we'll hear from you.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. But when I first got very involved in advocating for campaign finance reform, one of the first calls I made was to an old schoolmate, Congressman John Sarbanes, who we grew up together in Baltimore. He was still representing my mom at the time, I believe. We used to take Greek together with Mr. Vicio, and his mom was my yearbook advisor, and his dad was my senator. So he is, I think, the leading voice in Congress right now on campaign finance reform. He's the lead sponsor of HR 1. He's helped us with what we've done in Colorado and in Denver, and we've tried to help him back. And I want to turn it over to Congressman John Sarbanes. Welcome to Colorado.
Thanks very much, Owen. And actually, I've been to Colorado, and I've been to Colorado on this issue of campaign finance reform before, within the last 3 or 4 years. You're doing great work. There's tremendous energy in Colorado. It's something we're seeing across the country, but there's a difference between energy and then focusing and channeling it in a way that actually can produce these new systems of accountability to the people. And we all know this is about power. Who holds power in our democracy? Is it going to be corporations and deep-pocketed donors and lobbyists? Or is it going to be the people, everyday Americans, who are the ones who have invested in this idea of American democracy and unfortunately see it getting hijacked every day by special interests and are starting to push back? That's what you're doing in Colorado. HR 1 was really the culmination of years of effort in Washington to pull together a series of very dramatic and transformational reforms to fight corruption and fix democracy. I'm glad to say that every Democratic member of Congress last year both co-sponsored that bill as an original co-sponsor and voted for it. And that includes your delegation, which has just been fantastic when it comes to these issues. Diana DeGette and Ed Perlmutter. Ed I came in with in 2006. We were part of the majority makers class, but also the new members that you sent, Jason Crow and Joe Neguse, who really were part of this vanguard class of 2018 that ran very much on the issue of fighting corruption, and then insisted that within the first 100 days of getting to Washington, they would make a difference in the House of Representatives. And we passed H.R. 1 in the House on March 8th, 2019, well within the first 100 days of the 116th Congress. As I said, I think it sits on the Senate side because Mitch McConnell's got his arms crossed, basically barring the doors to our democracy and saying to the American people, you shall not pass. He is terrified of H.R. 1 because it would completely dismantle the power structure that he has built up over 3 decades, which includes voter suppression and includes lack of transparency and sort of ethical sort of end runs around what the system of accountability should be. And of course, it's created a new place of influence for big money operators out there that oftentimes are behind the scenes, behind the curtain, veiled in a way that I know frustrates millions of Americans. So we're going to continue that fight for H.R. 1 in Washington. But I have to tell you that so much of the power behind it is coming from these grassroots efforts across the country, including in Colorado. And I'm super excited that Aurora is now stepping into this space with this kind of initiative and making these proposals and reforms to give democracy back to everyday Americans who are frustrated with the current system. Every time this kind of reform gets passed and enacted at the local or state level, it injects new energy into our efforts to do this nationally. I can't overstate that because I've seen, frankly, how it affects our members of Congress when they see this bubbling up in local communities, when they talk to voters who are getting invested in this idea of reclaiming their democracy because they're enacting these reforms at the local level. They understand that doing that at the national level has to be an imperative. So I congratulate you on this effort. We are all, those of us who are in this space of trying to fight corruption, fix democracy, lift up the voices of everyday Americans, we're responding to some very basic grievances that we hear from the public. The first is, and this is a whole basket of reforms that are in H.R. 1, let me get to the ballot box without having to run an obstacle course. We have to make it easier to register and vote in America. Colorado, obviously, with your vote by mail system, has made great strides in that direction. But this election in the fall nationally will be a real test of our commitment to that. And there's a lot of reforms that we need to put in place to address voter suppression. The second major thing we hear from people is when you get to Washington or wherever laws are made at the local or state or county level, behave yourselves. That just means act ethically, be transparent, be accountable. Remember who sent you there. That ought to be a fundamental threshold thing in politics. Too often people veer away from that and they need to be called to account. And the third thing, the thing I've spent the most of my time in 14 years in Washington trying to address is this idea when people say to you, when you get there, don't get tangled up in the money. Remember where you came from. Don't allow the lobbyists to hijack the system or the big corporations. Fight back on our behalf. And that's where systems of disclosure that you are piloting here in Aurora, systems of small donor public financing of campaigns, and other steps to give average people, everyday Americans, as much of a voice on the playing field of their democracy as anybody else. Those are critical. We're all working towards that goal. This is the hardest thing we will ever do because the powers that want to keep the current structures in place are very strong. We've seen it decade after decade. But I believe that we can overcome that. And it's because of efforts like the ones you're leading there. So congratulations to all of you, to the groups that are part of this. I've worked with many of you in various chapter forms across the country and at the national level, to elected officials who are stepping up into this space with courage. Thank you for doing that. And I look forward to seeing the results of this effort as we have with other efforts across Colorado and across the country. Thank you, Owen, for the opportunity to join you tonight, and I'll send it back to you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. I know that you're busy and hopping off to another engagement, but we appreciate your participation, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Next up, so campaign finance reform, we are going to be focusing tonight on specifically the policy that we're looking at in Aurora, Colorado, but this is obviously not an issue that can be tackled alone at a municipal level, at a state level, and maybe even at the federal level, that we all have our pieces to work on and to do. And so we're lucky tonight to have Representative Emily Sirota. She carried House Bill 1066, which created contribution limits for school district director candidates. And in 2019, she was the sponsor of House Bill 1007, which created contribution limits for county offices. So really taking a look at this from a statewide perspective and examining the work that we can do there. So thank you so much, Representative Sirota, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate the opportunity to check in with everybody tonight. And I think you made a really important point in that we can't just focus on one level of government. There is quite a lot to be done at the federal level. Of course, Citizens United has done really devastating harm to money in politics across the country. But there is still a lot of work to be done at the state and municipal levels. And as you mentioned, at the county level, at every level of government, it's critical that we are doing everything that we can to limit the influence of money in politics, because I truly believe that is at the root of all of our struggles to make good policy that benefits the average American versus the wealthy and the well-connected and corporate America. So I did sponsor the bill, which was passed in 2019, to place contribution limits on candidates for county office because there were no limits. And so this year in 2020, we attempted to do the same for school board candidates because they too have no limits on the contributions they are able to raise. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were unable to get that bill across the finish line. So I certainly plan to bring it back next year. After these, the elections in 2019, we continue to see incredible levels of money flooding into these local, very, very local races that shouldn't be attracting the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that they are. So I will continue to pursue that work, but I am grateful for the opportunity to, I guess, just provide some encouragement for the work that you are doing in Aurora to allow average folks to be able to run for office in Aurora. I think that it is critical that we are able to elect progressives in every level of government, and there is truly important work, as we are seeing in our Aurora City Council right now, truly important work going on. And now more than ever, it is critical that we give folks the opportunity to be able to run for office regardless of how many wealthy donors they know. That people are able to run for office because they are connected to their community, because they are passionate about the issues facing their communities, and that once they get there, they will be able to be beholden to their community, to all of the grassroots small dollar donors who helped get them there, not the wealthy and the well-connected and the corporations, when these difficult decisions come, which they inevitably will, that our elected officials are able to stay true to their values, to their community's needs, and that really can only happen when they don't have to answer to their big donors. I see it happen at the state capitol over and over again, and it doesn't matter what party you're in. So I think that I look forward to seeing the success in Denver of this initiative, and I'm glad to be here to help contribute to the cause in Aurora. I think that it can help produce some really wonderful results on behalf of democracy and really restoring people's faith in their elected leaders, that they are there to actually represent them and their interests.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. You know, there's a reason that we are all building a strong democracy with common sense solutions that put everyday people ahead of big money donors. And it's so important to all of the accountability efforts that I think everybody who is participating tonight is really dedicated to. So next up, Owen Perkins with CleanSlateNow Action is going to be doing an overview of sort of how we got to this point and the policy that we're going to be looking at tonight. So take it away, Owen.
What we've been doing in Colorado and around the country, we've looked at other models, and we hope Aurora will become a model for other communities. But we start with the question of why do we need campaign finance reform and public financing for campaigns? And the basic sense is that people don't trust the government. They feel like there's some corruption going on there. A recent poll in 2018 from the George W. Bush Institute and the University of Pennsylvania Biden Center found 8 in 10 Americans are concerned about the condition of democracy in our country. They think it's getting weaker, and they blame big money in politics as the #1 reason for that. Close behind that is racism and discrimination. But this is on people's minds. Any polls you see will reflect that 70, 80, 90% level of support for campaign finance reform. We're supposed to be in a society where one citizen gets one vote, but it often feels like it's more like $1 a vote. And the Supreme Court has said that money is speech. I don't think any of us here believe that tonight, but if money is speech, how do people of modest means have their speech in this country? So that's what we're trying to get into. When Colorado Ethics Watch looked at the 2015 municipal elections, local elections around Colorado, they said voters have no idea which candidates are supported by special interests until after the election. Corporations and businesses have much greater influence in our local elections than they're allowed on the state or federal level. Both these things have to change if we're going to have open, transparent, and informed elections in the future. The alternative is we have a government we don't trust and we don't feel represents us. Princeton did this study, and they look at the ideal, what the ideal ought to be. If there's 80% of the people supporting a policy, a bill, it ought to have an 80% chance of passing. That would be ideal. It's not the way it works. The reality is whether 0% of the people support it, 93%, 100%, doesn't matter. It has a 30% likelihood of passing in Congress. So that's reality for we the people. That's what our say is worth. No matter how strongly we believe in it, we got a 30% chance of making change. I think when you're an activist, your odds go up. But what really puts your odds up is if you're wealthy. If you're not in the 90%, but in the top 10%, then you get a different playing field. You're the things that you want. If you want something 100% in that top 10% tier of Americans, you got a 61% chance of seeing that pass in Congress. That's the impact of big money in politics. That's why why so many people come to the conclusion that corruption is legal in America, and we're running corrupt elections and corrupt government. The corporations, the special interests love it because they get incredible return on their investment. They get 22,000% return on investment, according to the Journal of Law and Politics. And that, we could see that in the 2016 election cycle as a direct result of the Supreme Court decisions leading up to that. There was an extra $3 billion in that election that wouldn't have been there otherwise. There was about there was about $5.4 billion put in by the biggest companies in America, and they got back about $4 trillion on that investment in tax breaks and favorable legislations for big pharma, big health insurance, big oil and gas, all the usual suspects. The problem with big money is it doesn't look like our communities in general, but our communities end up reflecting the policy behind big money, and that's often they're reflecting the views of the white, male, and rich. When we look at, this was a study from Heather McGee of Demos and Robert Reich. They looked at donors giving more than $5,000. 94% of them are white. Not coincidentally, 90% of elected officials at that time in the country were white. It's getting better, but it doesn't reflect reality. Reality would show at that time about 40% of the country is people of color. We need to see that reflection in our offices in order to make the kind of changes that prioritize the public interest over the special interest. So the Democracy for the People initiative in Denver took this on by banning corporations from donating to campaigns, lowering the high contribution limits to be at the state level, which is more reasonable, and creating publicly financed campaign system with a 9-to-1 match on funds for small dollar donations, $50 and less, to candidates who opt out and don't expect special interest money, don't accept it. We also required the disclosure of outside money being spent on electioneering in Denver. Quickly, you can see, things like the mayor, the limit went from 3,000 to 1,000, but keep Aurora in perspective. They have no limits. So you have got contributions of $25,000 coming in Aurora for an ward council person or a mayor candidate from an individual or a corporation. This is not a radical idea we're promoting. It happens in dozens of cities, counties, and states all across America. We're trying, Lakewood just did it in the neighborhood, lowered the contribution limits considerably, banned corporate contributions, banned anonymous contributions. A lot of good reforms you can find on our website at CleanSlateNowAction.org. But here's a real quick look at a couple head-to-head matchups. Paul Cashman, my city councilman, and Liz Adams, his opponent. You can see Paul was outraised about 2-to-1 in the real money in his first campaign in 2015. Had the Democracy for the People model been in place, those fortunes would have been reversed with, well, not reversed, they would have come to even money. So because Paul is somebody who focuses on small dollar donations and turns down special interest money and corporate money, he can really maximize a system that favors small dollar donors, whereas Liz was maximizing a system that favors big money. We can see the same thing in Aurora. We track all the money in the races around everywhere people want us to track them. And a close look at a race between Juan Marcano and Charlie Richardson last year showed again, Richardson about roughly twice what Marcano had. If we do just the limits and the corporate ban, it changes that game. Marcano ends up ahead of Richardson, 26,000 to 18,000 instead of having half of his sum. If you add in the public financing component, because Marcano is also somebody who goes after small dollar donors and regular people instead of big money, different techniques, but he ends up with a 2-to-1 advantage. So, when candidates and elected officials have that choice between going to the deep pockets, the PACs, the insiders, or spending their time in the district, investing in the community, talking and listening with their constituents, how could they choose not to go to their district? They come away even better off for it. 3 very quick examples of effective campaign finance reform around the country. New York City. In the top map, you can see New York City contributions per block for state candidates where there's not public financing. And in the bottom map, you see New York City contributions to city candidates where there is public funded elections. And the density is so much stronger in that city map because when people know that their $10 can turn into $100, they suddenly feel like they've got power, they can affect change. And you can do a zoom in on Bed-Stuy neighborhood, a very diverse neighborhood in New York, same kind of thing. When they've got that public match, like in the second map there, the second elections down there, they come alive, they get engaged. and you see a whole different transformation. Seattle is probably one of our favorite examples for most people here. They have democracy vouchers. Every registered voter in Seattle gets $24, $25 vouchers to spend on candidates who don't take special interest money and opt into the program. It's been a phenomenal success. Candidates are raising $300,000 from these vouchers, 12,000 individual contributions. That's astronomical. And it means people on fixed incomes are becoming a major, powerful bloc in Seattle. People working minimum wage jobs are becoming a powerful bloc in Seattle. People without homes are becoming a powerful bloc in Seattle. That's a complete transformation of elections as we know them. Finally, in Connecticut, where we had Sandy Hook years ago and the gun violence, and the reaction around the country after nothing happened in Congress was, when is this ever going to end? When will somebody do something? Well, Connecticut did something, and because they have citizen-owned elections, publicly financed elections, their legislature, which reflected their community, said enough is enough. We're passing the strictest gun safety regulations in the country. They also passed paid sick days, raised the minimum wage, got in-state tuition for undocumented students. And all this is by having citizen-owned elections and starting to elect people who reflect your community. So my last slide, when the effects of public financing, when you put it into effect and good campaign finance reform, you get better voter turnout, you get engagement, you get communities of color becoming engaged, you get lower income communities donating at dramatically increased rates. Running for office no longer means you need to have great wealth or connections to wealth, and you get more diverse candidates running and getting elected, and that includes more women, more young people, and more people of color. That's what we're trying to do in Aurora. They really need this kind of change, and I want to turn it over now to Dale Nichols, who started this whole conversation going years ago and wrote most of this ordinance for Aurora.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Owen. I have a few more numbers to throw at you, and then I think that'll probably be the last numbers of the night. I don't have quite the technical sophistication that Owen has, but I hope they'll be interesting. In the 2018-2019 election cycle, individual contributions were about 1,710,000. Contributions to committees were 957,000. That's a total of $2,667,231, about $7.03 for every man, woman, child, and baby in Aurora, if babies were able to contribute. And I think that it's extraordinarily urgent that we improve Aurora's campaign finance system, because there's been a recent dramatic increase in the amount of major contributions. Looking at contributions of $5,000 or more, in 4 election cycles, 2011 through 2017, that's 2011, 13, 15, and 17, there were 26 contributions of $5,000 or more. In the most recent election cycle alone, 2018, 2019, there were 99 contributions of $5,000 or more. The largest contribution ever before this last election cycle was $25,000. This election cycle, there were contributions to an individual candidate, one contribution to one candidate, $100,000, and one committee received from 2 contributors $450,000. This should be completely unacceptable to anybody who wants to, as the Congressman said, bring democracy back to everyday Americans. I'm glad and proud to be able to contribute to this. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Dale. It's right. The numbers are meaningful. We don't, at the end of the day, we don't want elected officials beholden to wealthy donors. We don't want elected officials feeling like they owe more to the wealthy donor class or special interests than they do their individual constituents. And we also know that most constituents don't have thousands of dollars, let alone unlimited dollars, to contribute to candidates. In fact, the average American family isn't able to withstand a $400 unexpected emergency, right? These are things that we have to change to make sure that all of us have a voice in our democracy. And so to talk a little bit more about what's happening in Aurora and why Aurora and why this policy is Mayor Pro Tem Johnston and Councilmember Marcano. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to give a shout out. Earlier we were talking about HR 1. We do have our Congressman Crow's district director, Matham Alshadid, is listening in, and Congressman Crow is definitely following this and is supportive of our efforts for change. If my colleague doesn't mind, I'll start with my experience since you took it to a whole other level chronologically. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay, so I ran in 2017. Well, we talked about this earlier. We had a council where the average age was 65. The average age in Aurora was 34. And we didn't really have a council. It was all one party that really reflected our community. So we tried to make some changes, both with who is on council as well as the policies that we moved forward. We had a very competitive election cycle. There were 3 of us progressive women who were running against people who weren't really in that progressive area, and we had some folks scared. We were going to be offering some changes that weren't in Aurora before. So my experience was it was close to the election. We did have a special interest group under Aurorans for a Stronger Economy, because of course the dark money always has to have some interesting names, and it was funded by oil and gas. Before I ran, I was really a activists in the area of not having fracking near our schools and our neighborhoods. And this was a time where oil and gas industry was really infusing money in municipal elections and up. So we had quite a bit of money going to our opponents at that time. And but it wasn't as sophisticated as all of my colleague Juan Marcano share with what he had to experience. It was close to our election. I think it was the weekend before the ballots were due. And fortunately, it didn't have that impact. Once I got in office, I was really wanting to make some changes. It's hard when you don't have the majority of progressives sharing those values on this, but we were able to increase some of our reporting, some of the disclosures, because we really know that we have to, at least at a minimum, have this information accessible to the public. But now we can take this all to another level. So in the interest of time, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Councilman Marcano.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So yeah, I'm Juan Marcano. I represent Ward 4 on the Aurora City Council. And yeah, in 2017, the way we like to put it is in 2017, they didn't really see us coming until it was too late. But they were, by 2019, very well aware of us and the values that we stood for. So our races were much more challenging. As you saw from Dale, this was an absolute record-shattering year for campaign contributions, both in terms of direct contributions to incumbent conservative, electeds, and also through dark money. So yeah, I mean, the values that I ran on, and all the years of testimony now before City Council, before I became a candidate, I'm absolutely an advocate for housing, especially affordable housing for our working class, for getting transparency, not just in campaign finance, but also in disclosing gifts and things like that, updating our ethics code, ensuring that people actually have more of a stake in how their city grows and develops. Doing some work on the Unified Development Ordinance that kind of governs how all that works in the city. And lo and behold, my opponent and a lot of our opponents, because we ran a group of folks who share a lot of the same values. You see a lot of their contributions came from Metro District attorneys, came from housing developers, a lot of them out of state, came from car dealerships, interestingly enough, a lot of consultants and folks who basically just, prop up the old boys club that has kind of, determined the way the city is run. And, kind of hearkening back to some of what Owen was talking about a little earlier, it really is, a very non-diverse, very wealthy group of people who have more or less steered the way the city's politics have functioned for the last 40 to 50 years. So, we were up against quite a bit of opposition, but campaign finance reform is, of course, one of the major platform planks that I think that I ran on, and that I think Mayor Pro Tem Johnston also ran on. And I'm really excited that we're now to the point where we are not just ideating and what about, what if, but we're actually getting ready to, move this process forward. So, I'm really excited to see all the folks who are in attendance. We've got almost 50 folks listening in. And yeah, I'm just really psyched to get this process rolling.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll continue to dive into the policy a little bit deeper. I want to next introduce Austin Graham, who is legal counsel with the Campaign Legal Center. And he'll be giving us an overview of campaign finance, what we can do at the municipal level, and then I'd love to continue to have our council members chime in on the details of the policy that you all have been working on.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So I'm Austin Graham, and I'm legal counsel with the Campaign Legal Center. We are based in Washington, D.C., and we work to improve laws around the democratic process at all levels of government. I'm going to spend a couple minutes tonight giving an overview of what the Supreme Court has said about the big policy reforms that we're trying to bring to Aurora, including introducing contribution limits for city candidates and new disclosure requirements for political committees and other organizations that spend money to influence Aurora's elections. I'll start with contribution limits. For over 40 years, the Supreme Court has held that limits on direct contributions to candidates are consistent with the First Amendment and serve the public interest by preventing corruption, as well as the appearance of corruption in the political process. Beginning with the 1976 decision Buckley v. Vallejo, the Supreme Court has continually upheld different federal and state laws that impose contribution limits, reasoning that the public has a strong interest in preventing corruption. Likewise, the Supreme Court has validated complementary restrictions meant to prevent circumvention of candidate contribution limits, including restrictions on candidates' campaigns coordinating with PACs and other outside groups that make expenditures to support them. This anti-corruption interest has also justified laws that prohibit contributions from specific sources, including corporations. In 2003, in a case called FEC v. Beaumont, the Supreme Court upheld federal law's ban on corporate contributions as it applied to a nonprofit corporation that sought to give contributions to federal candidates. There, the court maintained that the anti-corruption interest was served by the corporate contribution ban, even in relation to a nonprofit corporation without the financial resources of a Fortune 500 company. The court in Beaumont explained that prohibiting corporate contributions helps to prevent circumvention of limits on contributions from individual donors who could otherwise use corporate entities as conduits to funnel additional contributions to candidates in excess of legal limits. In stories about campaign finance, reporters often describe the Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United v. FEC as though it invalidated restrictions on corporate contributions. That is not the case. In Citizens United, what the court actually held was that government may not prohibit corporate independent expenditures in candidate elections. Citizens United essential reasoning was that independent expenditures, unlike direct contributions to candidates, do not pose a risk of corruption because they are made independently and without the involvement of candidates or their campaigns, at least in theory. Citizens United was really an extension of a line of cases that treat election-related expenditures as a direct form of political speech, thus deserving of more constitutional protection than campaign contribution limits, which do not actually involve political speech by the particular donor. So in short, Citizens United does not foreclose the ability of a city like Aurora to establish contribution limits for city candidates or to prohibit corporations from making direct contributions to those candidates. As recently as last year, the Supreme Court declined to hear a lawsuit challenging Massachusetts' prohibition on corporate contributions. That signals the court continues to support the constitutionality of corporate contribution restrictions. In terms of existing contribution laws, at least 22 states, including Colorado, along with the federal government, prohibit corporations from making direct contributions to candidates. Additionally, about 40 states have some form of limits on direct contributions to candidates. The next issue I want to touch on is disclosure and what the Supreme Court has held there. So really across the Supreme Court's campaign finance jurisprudence, disclosure has probably received the most ringing endorsement in terms of its constitutionality as a policy. This is because, as the Supreme Court has explained, disclosure doesn't limit anyone's ability to speak about a candidate or a political issue or to express their support for a political cause. Within its campaign finance cases, the court has maintained that disclosure serves the public interest in three ways. First, it provides voters with important information about sources of political contributions and expenditures, and about the various constituencies who support candidates. In turn, this information helps to promote informed decision-making by voters on election day. Second, the court has recognized disclosure helps to prevent corruption, as sunlight has been said to be the strongest of disinfectants. And finally, disclosure helps with the enforcement of other campaign finance laws, like contribution limits and corporate contribution prohibitions, by providing hard data about the sources and amounts of money given to candidates and their supporters. So, while Citizens United is best known for striking down restrictions on corporate independent spending, the decision was actually a huge win for political disclosure. 8 of the court's 9 justices, most of whom are still on the court today, joined the part of Citizens United upholding federal law's disclosure requirements as they applied to Hillary the Movie, which is a video on demand documentary, as well as to commercial ads promoting the film. In fact, the court was completely comfortable with the extension of political advertising disclaimer requirements to 10-second advertisements that simply urged viewers to go see Hillary the Movie without any form of electoral advocacy as part of those communications. As the court explained, and this is an actual quote from Citizens United, even if ads only pertain to a commercial transaction, the public has an interest in knowing who is speaking about a candidate shortly before an election. So that's a quick and dirty rundown on where the Supreme Court is on kind of the big substantive issues that we're trying to bring to Aurora, and happy to respond to any questions in the comments. Thanks.
And before I hop over to the questions, because a number of them have also come in via email, so thank you for submitting those. It's not too late. If you have more questions about campaign finance generally or this policy specifically, please don't forget to type it into the chat. We want to make sure we address all of your questions. But before I get directly to those, to either of our council members, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I was, is it okay, Councilmember Marcano, if we put up the executive summary?
Yeah.
Are you able to do that just so folks can reference that, and we'll give you kind of the highlights? Austin gave some of the court's decisions behind that, but Councilmember Marcano and I are going to give you some highlights of what this reform will look like. So while we're getting that up for the executive summary, do you mind if I dive in, Councilmember Marcano?
If you'd like to start, go ahead.
Okay. So right now, as we mentioned, there are no limits in the city of Aurora. You can donate, like someone said, do a $25,000 check, and that's fine. So this new ordinance that we will have will institute campaign limits for ward council members at large and the mayor.
And currently right now, our reporting structure, even though there were some great improvements added last year to kind of add a little bit of transparency, while pressuring some of the incumbents to go along with it, we still don't really have very detailed reporting. So part of what we are doing here is improving the disclosure requirements, especially for outside groups, and expanding the reporting structure so that you have to start basically at the beginning of a election year, as opposed to waiting all the way up until you're just like 3 months out. That really gets, I think, the public an opportunity to know who these people actually are they able to connect with community, where are they getting their support from, which I think is really, really important.
Thank you. And then we also don't have any disclosure requirements. So as we all know, social media ads, all of that, those can just play and no one knows who's behind that, who's paying for that. So this will include disclosure, reporting on all the political advertising, communication, literature. So again, having that more transparency for our residents.
And not just that, but we're also adding teeth to a lot of our existing code around penalties for basically breaking the rules. So whether you're an individual candidate or managing an independent expenditure committee, which is, what synonymous basically with a dark money outfit, the managers for that or the campaign staff, I shouldn't really say staff because they're not paid usually, but your treasurer should know the rules and know how to report when they're required to disclose information and do so in a timely fashion. So we've had IECs come in, spend a ton of money and then not report intentionally until, even going beyond when they were supposed to. And I think that their maximum penalty that could be levied was $50 a day, which is a drop in the bucket when you're talking about $80,000 worth of spending. So part of what this does is actually increase penalties up to $10,000 if it's a repeat offender, someone who's basically acting intentionally in bad faith.
Thank you. And then let's see. We also have some more rules in terms of banning corporate donations. So we want to make sure that our donations are coming from people and residents, and again tied into that disclosure. And I should say the city of Aurora is investing in a new software system, separate from the requirements that this ordinance will have, but it will be much easier for residents to get on, go online, get the information, and then with the rules in place that we have with the ordinance, it will be much more user-friendly to be able to access that.
And last but not least, and I think this kind of directly goes to a couple of the questions that we've already gotten, is a potential public financing component. And I think that that's really, really important, because if we actually set limits where folks actually have to go out into community and earn grassroots support, some of that spending might, instead of going straight into someone's campaign coffers, be done through dark money organizations. So in order to make sure that that doesn't disadvantage folks who are running open, clean races, there is a public campaign, a public match component that we're floating for Aurora that would look something like $500,000 a year dedicated on a, basically $1 million per election cycle, because we have elections here every 2 years, which comes out to be about 0.0014% of our general fund. I know we're going through some hard times right now, so this is why it's still, proposed. It's not something that we're strongly committing to yet, but I think that you can't put a dollar sign on a functioning and healthy democracy. So I'm hoping that we can get support from folks to make sure that this actually happens, so that grassroots candidates will always be in a competitive position against big dark money special interest groups.
Great, and I just want to add, thank you, Owen, for putting the summary up. If you go to CleanSlateNowAction.org, there's the much more information. We have the executive summary on that, and we'll include that in the comments as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. So now the exciting part, because we have about a zillion questions that have come in, so we'll see how many of them we have time to get to. And this is just the beginning of this conversation. So don't feel like tonight is the only time. We'll have lots of opportunities for you to plug in on an ongoing basis. But the first question, and I think it's probably best for our council members, and maybe we'll start out with Austin. Lots of folks want to know, is this just going to make money go darker? If we have contribution limits, isn't everybody just going to stop contributing directly to candidates and just hide their money in secret, dark, scary places?
Yeah, sure. And, I do understand the appeal of, wanting to channel money to candidate committees, which are really the most accountable in terms of they report regularly, all that stuff's public. But the problem with just allowing unlimited money to go to candidates is, if nothing else, that to me signals like, wow, the elected officials are they're open for business in terms of, if you can give them $50,000, that's an easy way to win sway. So, pairing limits on money to candidates along with effective transparency requirements for outside political spending is really, I think, the sweet spot here, where you both get accountable elected officials who don't seem beholden to special interests, while also when you do see that money go to independent spending groups, there's adequate transparency there. You know who's really behind the spending. It's not this kind of opaque veil that's kind of hiding the identity of the source of the money. And that's what we're trying to get with this ordinance is that balance.
Councilmember Marcano, did you want to add anything there?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just making noise.
Great. Just wanted to make sure it's good to you. And, I guess I'll just add there too that as a point of contrast, we have had different offices throughout the state that haven't had contribution limits. Representative Sirota talked about county contribution limits and school board contribution limits, and we've still seen plenty of dark money in those races. So it's not the case that the thing preventing dark money is direct contribution to elected officials. So our next question, oh, sorry, go ahead. Our next question
and a good point.
Is from Josh, and then we had a couple other people ask something similar to this. He wants to know, will this policy stop IECs, and maybe somebody could talk a little bit about what an IEC is, from limitless spending, or at least hold them accountable? Right now, it's really hard for voters to understand who's trying to influence their vote because they're not getting that information back in real time, right? Maybe a campaign or an election has even ended before you know who paid for all those ads and whether or not those are people or organizations that you trust. So, maybe, Owen, I know that this is something that Clean Slate works on. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and then others can chime in?
I was trying to answer a question in the chat, so I'm a little distracted, but can you hit the last part? I know you're talking about IECs and the influence that this will have on them. Could you?
Yeah, how does this increase transparency, if at all?
Oh, well, this is shining the light on the dark money. I mean, what we're trying to do in Aurora and what has been happening throughout Colorado, both at the municipal level and the state level, has been getting it out in the open, getting it seen. I mean, we can't, without overturning Citizens United, stop the dark money altogether, but we can shine a light on it. We can make sure people know where it's coming from. And that is so often a determining factor, when we track money like that and we show, look at the mayor's race in Aurora or the Senate race in Colorado, U.S. Senate race in Colorado, the tracking on CleanSlateNowAction.org, the candidates with pages and pages of special interest contributions, that raises eyebrows. People are tuned in enough that, the data we gave at the beginning shows the population is tuned into this. And when they see that dark money, or that special interest money, that corporate money funding campaigns, it raises alarms and it makes them take a second look. And that's a very powerful, effect of shining the light on that money.
May I just add, Amanda, to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of the issues as being an informed voter, and the Aurora Sentinel has really done a good job of covering these issues, is now the time you find these things out, you've already submitted your ballot. So that shining the light is having this early on being disclosed, being able to have for voters, whether the press cover it or you're just an informed voter and you look at it, to be able to say who is having the influence over the person I'm going to vote. So this will really provide more information. Unfortunately, I'm going to be upfront with what we have now. It's not going to eliminate it, but it is going to shine that light, as Owen said.
And I think as a follow-up question, maybe for Austin, is this the kind of thing that we can do at the municipal level, or are we going to get overturned at the Supreme Court? I don't really want to be at the Supreme Court.
I touched on it earlier when I gave my little spiel, but the courts have been very supportive of broad disclosure policies, all the way back to Citizens United. You know, Citizens United said it's constitutional for the government to require a 4-second disclosure on a 10-second advertisement telling viewers to go watch a documentary movie about a presidential candidate. So, you know, the case law here is really on our side, and that goes down to the state level and to the local level. So, you know, we're on firm ground with the transparency policies.
Great. Thank you. You know, our next question is one that I'm so glad was asked, that there's so much going on in the world right now. We are in this really important accountability moment where we are finally having conversations around racial justice and racial equity that are long overdue. And so given that, is this the time to be talking about campaign finance reform? You know, especially to our council members who are in Aurora, who you know, are dealing very intensely with police accountability. You know, that's acute work that needs to happen right now. Why is this the right time for campaign finance? And is it going to help us with any of the other accountability conversations that we've been having? And perhaps Councilmember Marcano, you could start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really can't talk about issues of racial and economic equality and equity without talking about how our democracy is currently structured and how campaigns are financed. The intersection between race and class is really inseparable, and a lot of the reasons that, you know, we have had historic divestments from communities of color in this country and in this city. Aurora was historically redlined, come because of the kind of representation that we get. So we already know the outcomes of the structure as it stands. You get a very unrepresentative government most of the time. So being able to put these kinds of reforms into place that actually empower the people who live here, like, you know, the residents of the city, to actually get a more representative government elected, will yield tangible results in terms of policy and how your city grows and develops, and frankly, the kind of communication and representation that we get.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much. But I'm so grateful that we're having these conversations around systemic changes and systems of power that have been really terrible for all of us, right? And I think this is absolutely one of the fundamental things that we need to change in order to see the changes in power systems that we all want. So my next question is, in Denver, this was a ballot initiative, and we've seen campaign finance reform ballot initiatives throughout the country. Oftentimes, a citizen ballot initiative is the way that we can get something on the ballot, even if it's politically unpopular. Does this have to be a ballot initiative? And if not, how do we get this done?
Great. Should I take that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
It does not have to be for. I'm talking about our current proposal for campaign finance reform. I'm separating that from the public finance that hopefully we will be able to address. But this proposal, we can do it by having 6 votes on council. We have 10 members on city council, 4 are at large, and 6 represent different areas in the city. And then we do have a mayor who votes if there's a tie. So I've been reaching out. We've been, talking about this for a while. I do believe that we have the momentum to get this done.
Yeah. And I do want to just piggyback on that, because I did see a question in chat about why don't we just try to tax, the dark money? And that's something that we have brought up and explored. There's a couple of issues with that that we can tell. One, there's kind of like, it's an unexplored area of case law, and it might actually run afoul of some existing, restrictions. But not only that, we have Tabor in the state of Colorado. And if you are basically trying to tax dark money, it might actually then have to become something that the people vote on to allow, which would defer the implementation. So that's kind of why you have, this idea that we're still kind of trying to iron out, but also a different method of public funding as kind of like an interim or, something that could be carried on in perpetuity if we can't make another alternative work as, the law currently stands.
And if I may add, yes, I don't want it to seem overconfident. We never know, as Councilmember Marcano knows firsthand, how things are exactly going to play out. So we really need Aurora residents to contact their council members and make sure this gets through the finish line. So I know we're going to have our organizations talk about how we can organize and get that done, but it's really, really important to make that happen. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you both. And that's a great transition question. So, I mentioned that I'm the executive director of Colorado Common Cause. We've been working on these issues for about 51 years and helped pass contribution limits statewide by ballot initiative. So that was a valid question. There's a number you've heard from other groups, and I think most of their websites have been linked in the chat. So definitely check that out and make sure that you're in touch with what everyone is doing, because a number of us are all doing really great work. So again, thank you so much to PDA Colorado, CleanSlateNow, Working Families Party Colorado, Our Revolution Metro Denver, DSA Colorado, Indivisible CD6, and Campaign Legal Center. I think everybody has been invaluable to this process. And I want to kind of toss over to Sydney, who's a staff member at Working Families Party, to answer our next question, which is, what are the strategies to get this done? If I'm part of a community organization that wants to hear more, right? Maybe, my neighbors want to get involved, or I think they should better understand campaign finance, or I just think this is awesome and I want to be part of the cool kids. What should I be doing next?
Yeah, so we have a volunteer form set up, so everybody can go to their web browser, take out their phone right now, and go to bit.ly/D4P Aurora, Democracy for the People Aurora. And we have a volunteer form that allows you to let us know the many ways you can get involved. This is really it has been and it's going to be a community-led effort. So we need folks writing letters to the editor, calling elected officials, emailing elected officials, signing on as community co-sponsors to the policy, testifying at city council meetings, and inviting folks like us who can speak about the policy to your local meetings so that we can spread the word here. So hopefully somebody dropped that in the chat. Otherwise, I will in just a moment here. And yeah, we'd really love to have everybody involved. And thanks everybody for joining tonight.
So we will also, again, check out the chat, sign up, be part of our tribe. And we will also be following up via email with those who are interested. We have a long way to go, but we can make some really, I think, meaningful change in Aurora and in Colorado more broadly. We will also put the link to that sign-up sheet in the Facebook event in case that's where you get your information these days. So thank you again for being here. Thank you to all of our experts and all of our panelists. Thank you for sharing your brains with us. It's so important. And we look forward to the next step. Thank you, everyone.